This is the Occultae Veritatis podcast. I'm Ood Gallifrey.
I'm Leon Filger.
And I am Sage Murray.
Ba, 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 ba.
Warning. This podcast contains discussions of a frank nature. No detail will be spared. Because of that, profane language, death, gore, sexuality, violence, assault, and other horrors of reality will be discussed in full. The host will also make jokes about sensitive topics, because they love dark humor and because they are idiots. The host can and will be wrong, so please do your own research if you want to find out more about the subjects discussed. Please enjoy the show.
Now, are you sitting comfortably? Good. Then we'll begin.
Today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be.
The atoms in your left hand probably came from a different star than your right hand.
It is our basic human right to be fuck up.
A second plane now has crashed into the other tower of the World Trade Center.
Put chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay.
The defendant shall be incarcerated for the rest of her natural life with no possibility of parole.
You are not machines. You are not cattle. You are men.
We were somewhere around Barstow, on the edge of the desert, when the drugs began to take hold.
Occultae Veritatis.
See, that's the one thing that I can attest to that I've experienced real pain in. Because, I consider myself to have a pretty high pain tolerance, but if anything, flicks me or kicks me or hits me, I'm down.
Yeah,
I'm down.
I don't have a penis, so I can't empathize
So
with
the penis
that.
is fine. You can kick to the penis as much as you want. As long as it's not hard, you'll be fine.
Yeah, there's fetishes around that, eh?
Of course there are.
Yeah.
There's kinks for everything.
Yeah. The penis, they have to be stepped on by, high heels, sharp high heels, so it has to be pretty
When I lived in Vancouver, I was selling a pair of boots, and some guy messaged me and asked if I would he'd pay me for the boots, and I would just come over and just kick him in the balls with them and then leave.
See, okay, when I used to play guitar as a kid, I gained calluses on my hand, and pressing the strings didn't hurt anymore.
Sure, that's what the calluses were from.
Oh, yeah. Well, I assume my guitar strings are a bit more tough than my dick. But yeah, anyway.
I should hope so.
If you're into that specific fetish where your dick gets abused, do you gain, calluses on your dick that make it more hardy? You would think.
We'll have to research that.
Yeah.
Dick calluses.
No, you wouldn't, because you wouldn't get calluses. You get internal scar tissue, and that's a bad thing. Because it potentially make it impossible for you to get an erection, or make it impossible for you to lose an erection.
Oh, damn.
Impossible to lose?
Yeah.
That's only good for the first couple hours. They don't get all throbby and hot.
No, well, you could die.
Oh. Yeah. Oh, yeah, rotten blood and all
yes,
that. Yes,
septicemia. Yeah, you can die from an erection.
Oh, man. I'm risking life every time I have a hard-on. Makes you think. Anyways, that's 2 minutes of talking about getting kicked in the balls. What are we here to learn today?
Oh, this is me. Yeah. We're going to learn specifically about espionage and conspiracies surrounding the 1975 Apollo-Soyuz mission.
Apollo-Soyuz. So this is after they landed on the moon, because that was in 1969, I believe?
It ended in 1971, and this was the first time they'd used the second to last existing Apollo Command and Service Module. The second to last was used for Skylab disastrously, wow. And this one was saved to join with a Russian Soyuz module in space.
Yeah. It's interesting, I guess, the dichotomy you see, because you wouldn't think that in, the birth of the Cold War, they'd be sharing, a place in space.
Well, it was the end of the Cold War, and the space race began in 1954. The next year, the Vietnam War started. So it was a space race up until then, and in 1975, the Vietnam War ended and things defrosted a bit.
Yeah, so that's what we're talking about today, but before we do that, we're going to get into what's our poison.
So, what's your poison?
So today, since we are doing Russia versus the USSR, I got...
Excuses again.
Yeah.
Try that one more time.
Try it again.
Oh, no.
Russia and the USSR are generally synonymous. I think you mean the USSR versus the United States of America.
Oh, did I say Russia and the USSR?
You did.
You did indeed.
Jeez, I'm not even high or drunk yet. The US versus the USSR. So for today's drink, I have some California orange juice mixed with some Russian vodka.
Is it actually Russian vodka, though, or is it just American vodka billed as... Because Stolshnaya is American.
It's polar ice vodka.
Yeah, that's Canadian.
I understand that Russia has polar bears as well, so it's a little Russian, kind of.
Their polar bears are red, though.
Oh, they have red polar bears?
That's the only kind of bears they have.
How do you guys think it tastes?
I love screwdrivers. I feel like I'm 14 again.
I've never called it a screwdriver because it's more expensive at the bar than if you call it a vodka orange.
What?
Yeah, because it's a cocktail. It's more expensive. You just want vodka orange. It's just a shot of vodka. You've been getting screwed for how long?
I don't usually buy my own drinks.
Oh, well, la-di fucking da.
Right?
What do we rate the screwdriver out of 10?
I rate 5 drunk Sage Murrays in high school out of 6 drunk Sage Murrays in high school. It is really fancy. It's in like wine glasses and shit.
I'll rate it 5 brunches out of 10.
Oh, brunch.
Yeah.
You guys were so white.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, sangria and screwdrivers. Those are the brunch drinks.
And mimosas.
I'll rate it 4 dead cosmonauts out of 17 dead astronauts.
Oh, damn.
Oh,
I'm not sure what that means. Maybe we'll find out.
10, 9, ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
We are back on talking about hostilities between the USSR and USA during the early and mid days of their respective space programs.
Ooh.
So there's going to be some conspiracy, cosmonauts and astronauts preparing to shoot each other, and lots of other goodies in between.
Awesome. I can't wait.
Okay, so shall we? I'll take you back to the early 50s, or rather mid-50s, 1957, when the Russians launched a little silver basketball named Sputnik. And it was the first man-made object to orbit the Earth. And there were places in the middle of the United States in dark sky preserves at the time, which were many, where they could actually see this little thing zipping around the Earth, making this little beep, beep, beep noise. And that was the beginning of the space race, because the Americans figured at this point, and rightly so, they've got this satellite in space now, they can use it to bomb the shit out of us.
Yeah.
Which was not entirely without precedent.
They had no way to fight against it at that time.
Absolutely no way at all. And the Vietnam War started in 1955, so this is just a couple of years in. The Viet Cong were supported by Russia, South Vietnamese supported by the United States. Yeah. So we were very much at war with Russia and her allies at the time. So in addition to the space race, we were also dealing with a war that ended up lasting till 1975, which is an important date because in 1975, the two space programs, now no longer dealing with the hostilities of Vietnam, decided to shake hands a little bit and start what was known as the Apollo-Spyus test project.
Cool.
So I'll back up a little bit from that. We had Sputnik in 1957. In 1971, the Russians launched the first space station called Salyut 1. And they eventually had Salyuts 1 through 9. A couple of them never made it because they crashed in between, and a few cosmonauts were lost. And the United States was tinkering around with Skylab, using one of its last Apollo command and service modules. So when we look at the big moon rockets that were sending us to the moon, we had a first stage, a second stage, a third stage, and then atop it was a command module, a service module, and in the cases of the last 4 flights, a lunar module. So we ran out of Saturn rockets. We didn't have those anymore. So we had one modified Saturn V that we launched an Apollo command and service module into low Earth orbit, and instead of having a lunar module and some other shit in there, they launched Skylab, which was fucked from day one. They launched it. There were 2 solar cells on it. One of them was completely fucked. Just fucked. I don't know what else to say, but it wouldn't do its thing. It failed to deploy. So they did some spacewalks, kind of unfucked it a little bit, but the thing was chronically underpowered the whole time. They had 3 Apollo crews cycle through it on the smaller Saturn B1B booster. The astronauts hated it. There were well-known attempts to take over the ship. There was mutiny. They were pissed off that their schedules were too tight. They needed more time to run around and masturbate or whatever it is they needed to do. They had a giant garbage tank on the floor of Skylab that eventually became too full to hold garbage, and so they had like poopy diapers that they were just sticking to the wall in dirty bags.
Oh my god.
Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, the living conditions were terrible, and there were no showers, so they were all sweaty and nasty and pissed off.
That's
and
a fucking nightmare.
It was a fucking nightmare.
Good lord.
Did they just not plan for how long and what kind of waste people produce?
That's correct.
People poop?
Yeah, they fucked it up.
You gotta deal with it.
Well, a lot of it was a case of their days were planned down to the second, which is what we still do on the International Space Station, but we have a lot more personal time. If you gotta rub one out here and
or
there.
Anything. Go take a poop that takes longer than 4 minutes.
Yeah, go take your shit on the vacuum toilet, yeah.
Christ almighty.
So you're pissed off about that, and things didn't go really well. And there was a lot of really good science that came out of Skylab, and a lot of really good science that didn't come out of Skylab. So eventually, after Salyut 1, which was a very successful Russian space station, a single module, but they were able to dock with it a couple of times, and they had cosmonauts come and go, the Russians started developing Space Station Mir, which was 8 modules. It was really big. It was really fantastic when it was first built. It turned into a bit of a garbage dump. There were a couple of visiting U.S. crews, one space shuttle that docked what was called the Androgynous Peripheral Attach System, or the shuttle docking module, so that the Space Shuttle Discovery and later the Space Shuttle Endeavour could dock with Mir, exchange American crews, as well as a bunch of supplies. At the time, Dr. Shannon Lucid, who is a Canadian, or rather an American astronaut, set a time record for the longest time in space by a woman ever, who's since been eclipsed by a woman who just left the International Space Station, who now holds the all-time record for most hours ever spent in space over their lifetime.
Yeah, she just came down this weekend.
Exactly, which is super fucking cool. So we go back before Salyut in 1971. We've still got the Vietnam War going on. We're still launching people to the moon as of 1971, and we're starting to think about what to do once we're finished with the moon, because we've had Apollo 19 canceled, so we've got an extra Apollo CSM, Command and Service Module, kicking around. Yeah. We had to think, what do we want to do with it? Skylab was planned. That was done. The extra CSM, we decided at the end of the Vietnam War that we would cooperate with the Russian space program called Roscosmos, and would do a docking mission in low Earth orbit, which was super cool, because imagine, if you will, the Apollo Command and Service Module, which looks kind of like a cone with a cylinder attached to the back of it and an engine, and the Russian Soyuz, which is kind of like an ant. It's like 2 bubbles and an ass on the end of it.
Okay.
It's an ugly ship, but it works really, really well, and it's only killed a small handful of cosmonauts compared to the 17 astronauts the United States has killed.
Wow.
Yeah, so they've got a better safety record than us. But they decided they were going to do this collaboration in space. They had scientists and engineers flying back and forth between Houston and Moscow, Kennedy and Moscow, Langley, Virginia and Moscow, to develop their own very first version of the Androgynous Peripheral Attach System, the APAS, that we later used to merge the Space Shuttle and Mir. They had everything decided, everything was put together, and the nations debated that the rendezvous would happen in the airlock between the APAS and the Soyuz craft.
From ABC Space Headquarters in New York, here is correspondent Peter Jennings.
Union in space, talked about for weeks, months, and years now between an American space capsule and a Russian space capsule, greeted with widespread enthusiasm, some indifference, and occasional criticism. We are literally moments from docking now. The Soyuz and the Apollo are very close together. Apollo, of course, has been in pursuit of the Soyuz ever since liftoff a couple of days ago, and now they are beginning to approach Western Europe for a dock-up in what could be as few as 15 minutes from now, somewhere over East Germany. The only cautionary note in terms of time is that the actual docking, the actual coming together of the 2 command capsules is at the complete discretion of the capsule commanders.
So in the beginning, when the first docking was done, there would be no Russians crossing the tunnel into the American side. It would be just the Americans going to the Russian side. There were 3 Americans, Tom Stafford, Vance and Donald Slayton. Deke Slayton, interestingly enough, was the last member of the original Mercury astronauts who didn't get to fly at the time because he had some medical problems, and they kept deferring him. And finally, for this only flight in 1975, he was on board as a mission specialist and finally got to fly close to 20 years after he was first selected as an astronaut.
And they sent him to go play nice with the Russians.
Which they did on the surface, but here's where the cool conspiracy kind of comes in. It's never been explained who leaked this, whether it was leaked by the Americans or the Russians or both. I suspect both. But both the astronaut and cosmonaut crews were armed with knives and with pistols. And they
Pistols
were
in space?
Yeah, well they were told like at all costs avoid using the pistols because shooting bullets around inside a spaceship is not a good thing.
Yeah.
But both crews were prepared to kill the other crews in order to solve problems if they decided that anyone was going to try to take the other one's ship. And in the end, I mean, it was very cooperative. One of the really cool experiments they did was that before the docking had occurred, the Apollo Command and Service Module eclipsed the sun so that the Russian spaceship could take photos of the sun's corona as the Apollo spaceship drifted in front of it. So it was the first ever man-made solar eclipse, and we were able to do a lot of really cool science as a result of that.
That's cool. They were able to fit that little experiment just in the middle of all that.
Well, there was a whole lot of other international experiments, including some by Canada. It was a really wonderful opportunity because the payloads didn't have to be secret anymore, which meant a lot of European nations, I mean, mostly Eastern European nations, but they were able to fly experiments on Soyuz because the mission was no longer secret. Everyone in the world knew about it. There were postage stamps issued by both sides. There were collectibles that were sold. It was a very, very popular mission, and it was popular on both sides. The Russian people were generally in favor of it because it was sort of a symbol of the ending of the Cold War and a little bit of freedom that they ended up maybe getting or not getting. But it was sort of pivotal to the rest of the Russian space program because they had proved that they could dock really effectively in space with other spacecraft, which meant that after Soyuz 1, they kept building spaceship after spaceship after spaceship, making them all space stations, which eventually led them to Mir. And had it not been for Apollo-Soyuz at the beginning, where they first tested the APAS, there would have been no further docking missions on Russian space stations, which would have meant there would have been no Mir. And the interesting thing is, the last two elements of Mir that were added before some additional laboratory modules were two modules called Zvezda and Zarya. And they were initially planned to be two modules of Mir, with the plan at the time in the late 80s, early 90s being that the world would build the International Space Station around Mir.
Cool.
The problem was Mir was a shithole at the time. It had suffered a fire, which shut down one of their modules. Progress docking resupply ship had crashed into another module, which had caused it to rapidly depressurize, which was shitty because there was one dude on Mir, and all his personal effects were in that module, and when that module popped, he lost all his shit.
Oh my god.
What do you do with the fire in space? Like, you can't just, like, go outside, meet by the rendezvous tree, and everybody call your name out.
No, you're pretty fucked. Like, they have a couple of Soyuz craft that are docked with it in the Progress. And the Progress is useless because it'll burn up in the atmosphere when it tries to come home. Progress can be used as a lifeboat, though. Like, there are no seats in it. But you could pop a couple astronauts, or cosmonauts rather, in there and hang out for a day.
Yeah, they're not going to be comfortable, but they're going to be alive.
Yeah, and I mean, they got a little bit of oxygen in there for emergencies like that, but they can't go home. They've got to get to the two Soyuz craft, which is shitty because they're at the periphery of two of the newer modules. So if there's something wrong with the core module, you're fucked anyway. You're going to die in space. And the Russians actually famously killed some cosmonauts, a couple of them earlier on, because there was when they first designed the Soyuz capsule, there was only room for two cosmonauts and not room for their spacesuits to be worn.
What?
They've got these really cool Sokol spacesuits that they've been using for the longest time, and they still use them on the International Space Station. A good deal more advanced than any American design. Like, the Sokols are absolutely perfect. And Canadian astronaut Chris Hadfield wore Russian Sokol spacesuits when he was coming and going from the International Space Station. And
nice.
It's a fantastic suit. But in the original version of the Soyuz, because the computer equipment and all the shit they had in there was so tightly packed, there was no room for two cosmonauts and their Sokols. So they re-entered just wearing their pajamas. And the Sokol is a pressure suit. So if you do have a depressurization, it will save your life. They didn't have them on. The spaceship landed safely. They cracked the hatch on it, and they pulled out two dead cosmonauts.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and the skin makes a very poor pressurization.
Oh, it's super shitty, yeah, with your eyes exploding and whatnot. It's not... I mean, they say it wasn't a painful death because it was a very, very rapid depressurization. It was some pipe wasn't adjusted properly when they left. It was supposed to be closed. It wasn't. And so sometime during re-entry, it popped open, and they instantaneously lost all pressure and probably their eyeballs too.
I couldn't imagine working in an environment where if I miss one check on a checklist, like I'm dead and so is my crew.
Yeah, exactly. You are dead. And it was one of those, they have a tradition when the capsule lands is that the recovery crew will use a hammer to bang on the hull of the ship a couple of times. And the astronauts or the cosmonauts inside will use a hammer to bang back. And only once in history have they ever banged on the spaceship and got nothing back. They had, up to that point, no idea that their cosmonauts had been lost. So it was surprising for them to have pulled these fellows out, and there's nothing they could have done. Apparently, CPR was provided at the scene, but, I mean, these guys, they were totally fucked, yeah.
Cancel the parade.
Yeah, for sure.
Call the janitor.
So, back to the space station Mir. Zarya and Zvezda were created to be modules on Mir at the same time that we were planning to build the International Space Station around Mir. But as I said, Mir was a shithole. It was a garbage dump. They had problems with ventilation in there, such that cosmonauts would go to sleep and wake up gasping for air, because the ventilation was so poor that they would end up with a bubble of carbon dioxide forming around their head because there was no ventilation to blow the CO2 away. So they would have to do regular wake-ups every half hour to move to knock that CO2 out of them, or have friends come and wake them up and just literally blow the CO2 off their faces and carry on.
Oh, the wonders of low gravity.
Yeah, so that's kind of fucked. So it was decided then, right?
Awful.
1998, the final decision was made that Mir is lost. We're not going to do that anymore. Zarya and Zvezda were both launched by the Soviet Union, but are operated and paid for and owned by the United States. NASA owns these two Soviet modules, and they were the first two modules to form the International Space Station. And I was in grade 8 in space camp when Zarya first went up. And that was the first time an orbital segment of the International Space Station was flown. And I was absolutely addicted. And I'll admit, like right in front of me, as far as my notes for this, are maybe 12 lines of very
it's like
brief
chicken
scratch here.
on a piece of loose leaf.
I have a couple of...
all from the top of his head.
Yeah, just a couple of cosmonaut names. Everything else is coming out of my ass or off the top of my head. I was going to say, Apollo-Soyuz test project cost about $1 billion in today's dollars. So it was very expensive. It was mostly paid for by the United States because Russia had just broken apart and there wasn't a lot of money to be had. But they'd already sold the mission and they really wanted to test the APAS, which was an American design, because we knew eventually we were going to need stuff like that for the International Space Station, which had been planned prior to the decommissioning of Mir. It was going to be called Freedom when it was built around Mir, not the ISS.
How American.
How very American.
Freedom!
Yeah. So yeah, in 1998, Zarya first flew. Shortly thereafter, Zvezda flew. Shortly thereafter, Node 1 flew. Shortly thereafter, we had a permanent human presence in space, and we're now 1998, 2008, we're 19 years having a consistent human presence in space. The International Space Station has been incredible, not entirely without controversy. I mean, the Russians in the beginning were constantly scaling back their contributions through no fault of theirs. They just ran out of money.
Yeah.
And they relied on other nations. I mean, mostly the NASA Consortium, the European Space Agency, Canadian Space Agency to a limited extent, to build the rest of everything. And right now, the most powerful laboratory module on the ISS is the Kaibo module put up by JAXA, the Japanese space station. It's really cool. They have a little airlock on the ass end of it that they can toss experiments and microsatellites out the back door.
Oh, goody.
Which is the only place on the International Space Station where you can jettison anything other than people. I mean, there's a few docking ports for the Soyuz and the Progress, and the new Dragon ships that are really cool, because within the next couple of years we're going to have manned Dragon ships by SpaceX. So it'll completely eliminate our dependence on the Russian Soyuz to get our folks up and down, which currently is very, very expensive. The Russians ask a lot of money because they have to dole out some money to Kazakhstan, where the Baikonur Cosmodrome is located. That's where they do all their launches from. So everyone's kind of got their hand in Russia's pocket, and Russia doesn't have a lot of money. So once Dragon comes online, that'll be really cool. Europe used to fly the ATV, or the Automated Transfer Vehicle, which was huge, flew up on an Ariane 5 rocket, and was one of the only resupply ships that had thrusters on it that were strong enough that it could all by itself reposition the entire space station. Because every few months, just due to tiny, tiny little atmospheric particles that are still kicking around at 200 kilometers up, 400 kilometers up rather, it'll cause aerodynamic drag on the space station, which over a very long period of time will cause its orbit to decay. And so periodically, the space station has some of its own thrusters on Zarya and Zvezda, and then there are a couple of other spaceships, including the European ATV, that have strong enough thrusters that they can boost the orbit of the International Space Station. They don't do it by boosting it to a higher altitude. They boost it by increasing its speed, which then causes the space station on its own to drift into a higher altitude. So
Yeah, it's like kind of space tugboats.
Space tugboats, exactly.
Oh, that's cool.
Man, I know fuck all about space.
Oh, it's seriously dope. Another thing that I wanted to say about the differences between Roscosmos and NASA is that Roscosmos relies very heavily on automation. And they always have. Their cosmonauts have had very little to do from the beginning when they flew Yuri Gagarin and later the first woman in space and the youngest person in space, Valentina Tereshkova. They had nothing to do. They had one poking stick that they'd use for flipping the odd switch. But everything was sort of on autopilot. Whereas the Americans relied heavily on redundancies. So there was always the primary system and a backup's backup. And they were in control of everything all the time. Yeah. And there were many times where System 1, and in some cases Apollo 13 Systems 1 and 2 went down, and they saved their lives on System 3. Whereas had they been in a Soyuz, there is only System 1. System 1 breaks, you end up with some dead cosmonauts.
Yeah.
They were lucky because their automation systems were designed very, very well, which is why they managed to kill so few people, whereas NASA has killed 17. 7 on Challenger, 7 on Columbia, and 3 back on Apollo 1.
That's an interesting flip of, like, the conception of the space wars, because the conception that I hear most people talk about, and I hear tones and articles and stuff, that the Russians were just ruthless, and they didn't care if they killed a bunch of people, they were going to make it, but it's the exact opposite.
They're flying fourth generation Soyuz capsules.
Wow.
Statistically, it's the safest spaceship ever designed by humans. I mean, that thing works every single time. They've only had a couple of losses on Progress, which they launch on the Soyuz. Only one set of cosmonauts dead on the Soyuz. It's sort of the workhorse of the industry. It's simple, it's dirty, and it works.
Space, the final frontier. These are the continuing voyages of the Starship Enterprise. Her ongoing mission to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life forms and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before.
And if you're a real fan, if you're more interested in getting to know the hosts themselves, just make sure to join us for the after show. It's the little part after we play the palate cleanser where we just sit back, we thank some patrons, we give some thanks, give some shoutouts, maybe read a few comments from the Facebook page, all that good stuff. So our palate cleanser for this episode is Therapy by a band called Killjoy, who has their home right here in Saskatchewan. It's an all-female fronted band, and they rock. Enjoy.
You wear a smile. drove me out of my mind.
I think I don't sound like a piece of shit through the microphone.
No, you sound good. I actually think I sound less manly through this microphone.
No, you sound really good.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Because I have a naturally quite low voice.
I don't even know how I sound. People keep on telling me that I have an accent.
You do have an accent.
You do.
You do. I don't know how, because you're from Saskatchewan.
And I don't know what it is, but you absolutely talk weird.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I love it. It's part of your charm, but you 100%.
What do I sound like?
What do I sound like?
I don't know. That's the thing. I can't put my finger on.
I don't know, but you have like a different, like, it's like a more like a breezy way of talking, I guess. Like, you sound like more casual.
Oh, I'm okay with it. Maybe that's why I get away with saying so much. Because I can get away with saying shit that other people can't.
No, totally.
It's because you'll start with like a higher pitch, and then you just like drop into more of a baritone to finish a sentence, and it's just like a smooth, toneless baritone.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It is. Like,
it's weird.
It's weird. I don't know where you got it from.
I've known you for years, and I've always noted that.
I've noted that since I've known you too, and I've only known you for like 3 years, but that's enough.
Yeah. You all sound really good on this, but our Patreon is www.patreon.com/ovpod.
OVPod. And that is also
a sex toy.
Yes.
Maybe.
Is it a sex toy?
Yeah, it's a blue gooey thing with a vibrating bullet inside. It's called an OVPod.
I'm going to Google this.
Great.
I'm going to contact them to see if they want to be sponsored.
I maybe just made it up.